So let's talk to patients who've gotten care, who've gotten mammograms recently, to go back to your earlier example, or some sort of care, whatever service line we're focusing on. And let's understand what are the elements of the experience that really met their needs and exceeded their needs. What are those areas where maybe we're differentiating from other healthcare organizations in our market or other choices they might have? And because those are the things then we want to make sure we're highlighting in the website. And likewise, we always want to talk to maybe patients who considered our organization but went elsewhere, because that can help us say, okay, well, where did we drop off, or where did our competitor or this other organization in our market, where did they really hit the note in terms of meeting the job that the patient had?
All right. So, hi, everyone. This is Brad Munch from Symmetris. Symmetris, we're a digital agency who help our clients extend the lifespan of their healthcare websites. And today at the podcast, I've invited Steve Koch. He is part of the founding members of Cast and Hue, and we're here today to talk about designing healthcare websites that around what patients really need. So, hi, Steve.
Brad, how are you? It's so good to be here today.
It's a pleasure, and I'm glad that you made some time to speak with me. We basically, both of us contribute to building and evolving healthcare websites, and a lot of them are about how do we kind of get to the transaction to booking or whatever, but there's not that much talk about how the people feel when they're going through that process and what are the different steps that they have to go through. And so I think at the end of the day, what we want to learn through today's conversation is how can we create a website that makes the patient feel confident about the choices that they're making on the hospital or health system website. But before we kind of get into that, I'd love it if you kind of could give me a quick intro to, who you are, your experience in healthcare, and your particular expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great setup for our conversation today, and excited to chat through it. Yeah, Steve Koch, as you said, one of the founders of Cast and Hue. And so Cast and Hue is an experienced design consultancy that really uses human-centered design to help bridge that gap between what people want and what organizations are delivering to them. And I think we could think of that in a lot of different ways, whether it's how we make an appointment in healthcare, how we engage in a waiting room, and especially what we'll focus on today, how do we engage in those digital places? How do we engage on the website? And so what we try to do is really understand, starting from that person's perspective, the patient, the healthcare consumer, whatever you want to call them, and understand their needs so that we can ensure that we're designing an experience that meets and exceeds those needs. And excited to chat more about that today. But Casted Hue again we work a lot in healthcare. We really are focused and passionate about helping our clients bring in that patient perspective, and so that they can continuously have a holistic view of those patient journeys and design experiences that meet and exceed the needs of patients, so that it not only drives and brings in new patients, but builds loyalty as well within their organization.
I think that there's a lot of talk about being patient-centric, and it's not, always the case. And the healthcare marketers in particular are one of those positions in the organization that you understand the full kind of patient journey, because when you're a clinician, you see them when they're, getting the care, and if you're in the billing, you just see them paying for those bills or whatever. But I think that the healthcare marketer is able to see that full journey, and that's why I think what you bring to the table is really, really interesting. And just to kind of, recap, Symmetris, we build a lot of healthcare websites, and we want to try to make those journeys that are digital more seamless, help to focus the people on the different goals that they're trying to set. And we usually work in collaboration with organizations like Cass and Hugh, who are going to help give us that insight and to how to approach the design of different websites. So when we were talking, prior to this conversation, one of the, I guess, tools or frameworks that you use is the concept of jobs to be done. And I find that's really fascinating. And I wasn't as familiar with that concept, getting into this as I thought it would be, because I have an idea, high level of, design thinking, but how does that apply specifically? And so I think the people who are listening, and just to kind of, before we delve into the subject, could you give me a bit of an overview of why that's an effective method, why your team chooses to use it, and how that fits into the whole flow of improving that digital experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Jobs to be done is an interesting framework that we use to really understand what drives decision making, what drives really behavior, and what motivates people to do what they do. We all know that we behave irrationally sometimes. It's one of our mantras is it's very difficult, almost impossible for people to predict their future behavior.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is that so much of our behavior is driven by emotion. And what Jobs to be done does is really focuses in on the needs that drive people to make the decisions. And if we can understand those better, then we can design experiences, messaging, websites, etc., that better meet those needs, and we'll have a more fruitful engagement with the people we're designing for. So the idea behind Jobs to be done is that people hire you to do something. And so the great example that people always use is people don't hire a drill to make a hole in the wall. They are hiring whatever will make the hole in the wall best, right? And their job to be done is to get that hole in the wall, not to know how fast the drill is,
Right.
what speed it drills at, or any of those kind of functional needs. What they want to know is how can you best make a hole in my wall so I can hang a picture?
So it's kind of like the
If
outcome. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. It's getting to the outcome, getting to like what people really want to get to. And so, you know, in healthcare, we could think about it as simply as like people want to make an appointment. And so let's optimize our website to make an appointment easily. Great. That's important. That's a functional need. What are
Right.
the emotional needs? Peace of mind. I want to understand, why my foot's been bothering me and get back to the gym, things like that. And if we could start thinking about those emotional needs and layer those in with the functional needs, then we're going to have that our messaging and our website experience is going to be that much more impactful. So we use, what we want to do is always start by talking to people, understand those journeys, understand their experiences, and then we can start uncovering the needs that drive their decision making. And furthermore, get to that job to be done because that will help us drive better design, better experiences.
And just to kind of understand, because when you're talking about those needs and we're talking about making that hole in the wall, for me is it's a very kind of it feels like, oh, I need to kind of book an appointment or whatever. But then when you get to I want to get back to the gym, feels like an other kind of overarching. Does one fit into the other? Are they parallel? Like one is more of a like emotional like
Mhm.
approach and one is more of like a very more tangible functional need? Or do they coexist or does one fit within the other? Like how does that work?
They definitely coexist. So, what we always look for when we're understanding jobs to be done is three different types of needs we focus on. So, we've talked about functional needs. So, those are those kind of logistical needs, those things that are almost table stakes, right? Can I make an appointment? Is there a doctor available? That's important. Then the emotional needs. What am I looking for? What do I want to feel like? What am I feeling like today? And where do I want to get to? And how can
Oh,
a healthcare organization help me get there? And then another need is social needs, which is thinking about, well, what might people think about me if I'm doing this? And you don't think about that every day when you're building a website, but those needs do impact how people make decisions.
mm,
And it's really easy to focus on those functional needs, but the emotional needs, science has shown over and over that the emotional side of our brain works about 200 times faster than the rational side of our brain.
wow.
And so our brains are going to be making decisions based on emotions. And so the more we can understand about emotions and the more we could speak to emotions, the more impactful our work's going to be. So it's a combination. And I always say, the functional needs are table stakes. And so we need to make sure we're covering that because if we don't cover those, people are going to abandon the website and go someplace else.
Right.
But then if we can have those emotional needs, they're that much more likely to stay with us, maybe click to that next page, maybe understand our experience a little bit better and be drawn to us a little bit more. And so we understand their jobs at every step of the journey. That really can help impact how we think about design, how we think about our key messages, how we think about our value prop.
Okay, wow. Well, that's like pretty far reaching. And so how does that like translate to when we're building, let's say, a service line page or something like that? How does that translate? Because I'm guessing the functional side of things is I want to understand, does, my hospital system, do they offer this type of let's say preventive, mammogram or whatever? So that's
Right.
one of, I guess, the functional need. I want to figure out if they have the service that I want. What would be, how do we apply the job to be done with all these different other layers onto a specific page like that? Or
Yeah,
does it
that's a
go
great.
beyond? Does it go overall for the whole site? How does that fit?
Well, I think you could think of it. It's a good question. I think you could think of it both ways. I think sometimes we can look at just healthcare as a whole, understanding the jobs that people want to do, and they're going to be different. But if we can understand what's driving people, is it, somebody that's proactive, somebody that has a healthy lifestyle, somebody that has chronic conditions are going to have different jobs to have. That, from a whole health system perspective, that can help us really think about how we segment our content, segment our outreach and things like that, because that will help us. I like segmenting by the jobs or segmenting by needs, because that helps us really refine how we talk to people. And that can be really impactful.
I'm used to thinking of this as personas, right? Like, oh, I
Hmm.
got you know, the health conscious, 30 some odd, person. And then we have the, golden years kind of person who is worried about, their cancer and they're not very techno savvy kind of a thing. But you're bringing this additional kind of layer. Do you, because you're saying, are we going to be segmenting the ads by job to be done versus by persona? Is that a completely different approach?
It's, I think it's a complementary approach, and we often will help our clients build personas that are based around jobs to be done.
Okay.
And I would say that the biggest difference is where you start. And I think what we do is we start with the needs. And so we look for the different segments of these needs that roll up to jobs to be done to help understand, are there different groups of people? How are they thinking? What are the key messages that are going to align with those needs? And then we layer on the demographics and look to
Right.
understand, are there trends around age? And there may or may not be. I mean, we'd love it, right? Especially from a media buying perspective. We'd love it if everybody was 24 to 35 or whatever the age groups are. But what we want to do is we want to start with the needs and layer that in, and then use those where we need to. Whereas I think traditionally we often see these generational or age-based demographics is where it starts. And then we try to layer on other things like, oh,
Right.
they're older, they're not tech savvy. Well, maybe, but we all know examples of different, different people at different ages that have different levels of savviness around tech. But I think what we want to, the reason why I think that's powerful is because today we could be so targeted, both in how you create
Mm.
personalized experiences on websites that you build, to how you target people through marketing digitally and even, on TV and things like that. Whereas that age-based demographic was so focused on these media buying. And I think it's kind of something that's stuck through, but we have so many opportunities now to connect with people that we could be much more focused.
Okay. And so if we kind of bring that back to kind of the website itself, what
Yeah.
are, like, from your experience, what are the main jobs to be done that are, standard on a hospital or healthcare website? What are they usually? It's always these 3 to 5 jobs to be done that we're looking at.
Well, I think, they're always going to be slightly different, right? Because there's so many things that impact it. Your market impacts it. Who are your competitors? The service line people are looking for, whether it's like you were talking about something preventative, like a mammogram, that's something that we want to always increase the number of people getting their mammograms. And so we want to think about those jobs as opposed to somebody who may get a diagnosis coming out of their mammogram and now they have to find a place to get cancer care. And so the jobs are always going to change. But I think the biggest theme that I see that we always want people to look for, that healthcare organizations to look for, is understanding, what those emotional needs are through it. And I'll give an example like Doc Finder, right? People are looking for providers. And what do we most often see? We see where they went to school, where they did their residency, where their fellowship was, and we're seeing more and more, maybe a couple videos here and there, but what the job people have to be done is they want to have a relationship with their doctor. And we see it over and over again in terms of like a common job to be done is people want to understand how that doctor will care for them and what kind of
Yeah. What's
relationship
their
they
their
will
care
have.
philosophy, right?
Yeah, what's their care philosophy? How will they engage with them? Simply what's their bedside manner? And oftentimes it's challenging we don't see that. enough. And
Rarely,
at the
yeah.
end of the day, that research shows over and over again. We were just talking about conferences. Brian Carlson and Megan Prus from Vanderbilt at HMPS earlier this year had a great presentation around the experience. And one of the findings that reflects what we've seen in our research is that people people believe, except in the most extreme cases, they know that they believe they're going to get the right care from you. The
Hmm.
care is table stakes now.
Okay.
They don't think that their hospital system is going to hire a physician, a specialist, unless they're really going to provide the right care. What they're looking for is, what's that relationship going to be? What's that care going to be? And so, how do we use the website? How can we use the website to really understand why we're best for them to hire us for that job to be done? And I think that's a key thing that, like you said, we don't see it enough, but I think we should see it more and more because it's so core to how people think about where they might get care.
That's so insightful in the sense where I'm like, from my own experience, I think the relationship that I would have with my physician is really high on the list, and it really reflects what you're saying, where I expect there to be this standard, right, of their knowing how to treat, whatever ill I have or help me to prevent XYZ. And I want to know, is there going to be a good fit, right,
Hmm.
between me and the physician? And I had never thought of it in that way before. And I guess that's why I want to check the reviews and I want to read what people
Right.
say and understand. Like when there's a video, like I'm always blown away by hospital websites that have a video, like a 1 minute snippet of that doctor kind of explaining, who they are and where they've come from and what they're trying to achieve. I'm like, oh wow, in that 1 minute, I feel that I've connected way more with that doctor than all the doctors on the alternate side, right? That don't even have
Yeah.
that little personal touch. And that kind of connects with the I think overall, like what I've been hearing since forever is that one of the main drivers of communications and marketing for hospitals is we want to make sure that people trust us, right? The trust is like a
Right.
super high priority thing in healthcare in general, right? And so what you're saying, that people trust the care, now they want to kind of trust the individual physician.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. They're looking for, yeah, trust is so important. And that's been definitely a theme we've seen. It's always been there, but it's been more important than ever, especially the last few years. And the more we could show that, I think, and the more we find opportunities to communicate that we're trustworthy is important. And it's not just in the provider, but it's like, how are things laid out? How easy do you make it for
Hmm.
me to get from that moment when I click, make an appointment on the website, hopefully we have online scheduling, to when I walk in, so now we talked about jobs to be done. It's a mix of functional and emotional, but like functional jobs, like how do we help people know where to park? How do we help them know where to walk to get to the doctor's
Are
office?
you
Those are
anticipating my needs,
functional
basically,
needs.
right?
Yeah, but those would be emotional needs if I can't get there. If I don't know where to park, my emotions will get very high very quickly. So that's a mix of of wayfinding, but the website could be incredibly important in that, in terms of just really using, and we've seen a lot of great examples of it, of using that digital experience to set people up for success, especially in stressful situations where they're going in for a first appointment. If you're going in for a first appointment with a doctor, something's wrong, right?
For
Most of
sure.
the time, and not all the time. And so you're vulnerable. You're probably a little nervous. How can we use how we communicate with people digitally to help alleviate that as they make their progress?
And so, and I think that kind of connects with, I think, where the next kind of part of the conversation, where I want to talk about how to actually take this insight and this understanding of the jobs to be done and how do we implement them, right? In the visually and in the design and in the architecture and structure of the website. Because in a sense, you were talking about that emotional aspect. And I think I agree that we're very emotionally driven. And when we go to a website, there is no objective criteria of saying, oh, it's always like, oh, I like this, hospital better than the other one. There's some feeling somewhere that I trust this place more.
Mhm.
And then that's going to drive you to making that decision. And it's all those little things, like the kind of, I forget how you do anything is how you do everything. So you expect that if they put this thought into my experience when I'm trying to find a physician or just understand about this, institution, or just finding my way to whatever location that I want to get to. If they're doing it well, I'm expecting the rest of my experience is going to be representative of that. So
Right.
how do you now take that insight and that information that you're getting in these jobs to be done, and how does that reflect on the how we design healthcare websites?
Yeah, I think it's a really great example because I think that's something we have to think about is that, and I'm going to pull away from digital for a moment and then zoom back in. But you have to think about how every interaction that patient has with us is going to impact how they see us. And
Absolutely.
they don't think of us as digital versus in person, versus something else. They think of the holistic experience. What you just shared, like, reminded me of an example of a recent project we did where a patient who had received not necessarily a diagnosis, but a detection that was likely to lead to a cancer diagnosis was talking about how the first place they visited, just the waiting room seemed unorganized and just
Oh,
didn't seem it just was a little cluttered, and it immediately set them on the wrong path. And they didn't choose that doctor. They went to see another doctor that everything was like boom, 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 regimented, smooth. And they see that as a way that is going to be reflected in their care. And so we could think about that from the website as well. Obviously, we want clean, easy to navigate websites. But I think further, what Jobs to be Done helps us do is understand in what we do is the process is let's talk to patients. So let's talk to patients who've gotten care, who've gotten mammograms recently, to go back to your earlier example, or some sort of care, whatever service line we're focusing on. And let's understand what are the elements of the experience that really met their needs and exceeded their needs. What are those areas where maybe we're differentiating from other healthcare organizations in our market or other choices they might have? And because those are the things then we want to make sure we're highlighting in the website. And likewise, we always want to talk to maybe patients who considered our organization but went elsewhere, because that can help us say, okay, well, where did we drop off, or where did our competitor or this other organization in our market, where did they really hit the note in terms of meeting the job that the patient had? And once we start to get those insights, then we could start turning those into, okay, here are the things that we need to make sure we focus on to people feel comfortable. Like we talked about the provider finder, the doctor finder. So what are they going to see? Information can we give them that they're going to click on, show me available appointments. And then once they get that appointment, what can we do to set them up for success? And so, yes, there's some table stakes, like we talked about, parking, directions, wayfinding, but there's usually more than that, like how to set people up for that appointment, how to prepare for the mammogram. But people in general, we all want to have control. What we see often in healthcare in a number of different ways is this sense of loss of control.
right.
Waiting does that. Not getting test results does that. Not knowing when an appointment might be available does that. And so that's another element too, is how do we provide these patients more control on their journey? Because what they don't have control over, especially if it's not preventative, is their health. And so how do we give them control everywhere else we can?
And so, and what is like, how does that reflect design wise to give them more control? Because I've seen a trend where we're now on, there's pages where like what to expect from your appointment. These are the steps that are going to happen. This is, we're kind of anticipating and telling them what is the process, right? That's going to, this is how it goes. But is that giving them more control because they have a better knowledge of what's going to happen next as opposed to the absence of knowledge? Is that what we consider control? Is that because that's more related to, I'm going to add this content to my website and less about how it's going to be necessarily thought out or designed? Like how does that tangibly, appear on the website?
Yeah. Well, I would say there's two ways to think about it. I think number one is that when you understand the key jobs to be done for patients, around that situation, then you can prioritize
Right.
your content, prioritize what kind of information you're going to give them. I think your examples are great. Like, yes, we don't see this a ton, but we're hopefully seeing it more and more of what you could do to prepare.
Hmm.
And then what's the right way to deliver that? Is it on the website? or do we send it via text, or do
Right.
we, do we send it via email or whatever it might be? Like that's something we can learn from our patients. But um, I think that's a key element of it. I think the other ones, and to take us all the way back to the beginning of a conversation where you mentioned design thinking, I think that's where design thinking and co-creation can be a big role, especially from website development. Like we'd like to, if we identify some of these key jobs, well, then let's use some of those human-centered design principles, bring in some patients to, sit with our technology teams and sit with our UX designers and talk through some of these key areas and co-create some ways to do it together. And I think that can be really powerful as well to help ensure that we're creating experiences on the website that really meet what patients need.
Right. What happened? What my fear, or like what my caveat I would have in this sense is, that story about, Ford saying that, if I had listened to my clients, I would have made faster horses and I wouldn't have built a car. Right. And
Hmm.
so, where do we have to kind of take a leap of faith and say, okay, well, we're getting these types of feedbacks, but that's not actually how we solve that. We have to kind of build this other thing, like, oh, I have to
Right.
create a better search in the website. That's going to provide the answers to all these questions, or I have to streamline the content. There's too much content. There's just too many sections in the menu. Like, how do we jump from that to, because they're not digitally savvy, right? These
Right.
the patients. So how do we interpret what they are giving us as feedback and say this is how that re- the repercussion of that?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think that's one of the things that makes jobs to be done so powerful is that so much research that you might do in, let's say, a focus group might be just focused on, hey, look at this website. What's missing? Tell me
Hmm.
how you could do
Right.
better, how we can do better here. We're not doing that with jobs to be done. We're understanding the needs that are driving their behavior.
Right.
And so when we start thinking about developing ideas based on those needs, we're not restricted by what we're already doing. We can insert those constraints later, but what we're doing is, if we use design thinking with the example of the Henry Ford example, we start to understand those needs of getting someplace faster, of having comfort,
Mm,
and all those elements, and then we're not constrained to just thinking about a faster horse. So that's where jobs to be done is powerful. By focusing on the needs, it helps us ideate in an entirely different way. And co-creation I think is really powerful. So going to the other side of design thinking is a super powerful element because you're getting thoughts from, you're getting ideas from your patients, from the people you're designing for. um, but it's how you frame what we call design challenges. And so if we're framing ideas on around, how can we make the experience better after you make the appointment online? And we've done research to understand what some of these key challenges are, then we can be much more open in our ideas. Now, what often happens is there's times where we'll come out of a design thinking workshop where we'll have wireframes that can almost go into production after a little bit more testing and prototyping.
right.
But oftentimes we'll get ideas that say, hey, based on what we learned from their jobs to be done, what they've told us in this ideation session, we could take that together. We understand what they're trying to do. And then we can use these amazing technologists on your team to say, hey, let's figure out how to do this digitally to really better meet those needs. So that's where it becomes really powerful. We don't want to be prescriptive and say, how do we make this better? We want to start with the needs. And then if we can better satisfy those needs, either with new ways of doing things or just emphasizing the ways that we really satisfy their needs through marketing and communication, then we're going to be that much more successful.
Yeah, I love that perspective because I've been into those kind of meetings where you're conversing with people who represent those personas or those users, but they're trying specifically to say, fix this, fix that. And just kind of delving deeper into the actual job to be done seems to me like a way to be much clearer on the alignments
Yeah.
of the outcome, and then let the specialists who are the designers, right? They're going to be able to translate that into reality. But we're not asking the patients to be designers. We're asking them to be clear about what their actual needs are. And so I definitely see how this connects with the end, the outcome of once when we do apply this approach that, conversions are probably going to be higher. Have you seen any kind of stats or data to prove that this approach is making a difference?
I think that's a great question because we always want to measure. And so I think, there's two things we look at is we want to, based on the insights, based on these needs, what can we use to measure that we're accomplishing needs for those folks? So part of that might just be, through some of the survey elements, are we helping you get from point A to point B in a better way? Like, yeah, how do you
Yeah.
feel once you make the appointment? I think some of those other elements you're talking about, like, are we getting more appointment requests? Are we finding people engaging with these videos? And if they do, are we seeing the doctors with videos? Let's test the data and see if we're getting more appointments. Are we seeing, when we think about wayfinding, are we seeing no-shows decrease? So those are some of those key elements we want to look for. I think from a bigger picture is that if we are, we talked about the broader jobs to be done, understanding those, I think that helps us lead to, are we seeing less leakage? When
Yeah.
patients in our healthcare organizations get that referral, are we making it easy for them to go see that specialist? And is that happening? So and that's one of the most important elements for any healthcare organization too, is just, are they staying within our system? Are we providing an experience that really meets those needs? So those are the areas we track, but we also want to make sure we're aligning what we're measuring with what we uncovered in the jobs to be done research and what we're building on based on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so there was a great, like, this has provided me a lot of insights on how to approach design of healthcare system websites differently, or nuancing how we're thinking about the different jobs to be done. Like, what do you think, like, if I'm a, director of marketing or a CMO at a specific health system, and I want to leverage this type of insight to provide a better, more trustworthy experience digitally for my current and future patients, like, what do you think would be the main, next steps or actions that I should be taking to kind of try to apply this approach like today?
I would say, like, if we're thinking about, you know, the baby steps, if you will, like, what's the first step we can take? I would say, like, just figure out a way to listen. Where can we find ways to talk to our patients? We can, because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've seen this, when a lot of things will get built without any sort of patient feedback, or maybe we don't listen to the patients until we get to the testing phase after we've already invested time and money in terms of building something. And so the first step is, let's start early. And we don't need to talk to a ton of people. I always like to say, like, 8 is enough. An old
Mhm.
TV show from my childhood, which also ages me. But what's important to know about that is that, especially from a qualitative research perspective, if we talk to 8 people that are having a similar experience, let's say 8 people who may be eligible for a mammogram or get mammograms on a regular basis, we're going to uncover about 80% of the key insights about that experience. So
Wow.
it doesn't take a lot to talk to 8 people. Yeah. And what research has shown is you're going to get about 80% of the insights you need through those 8 people. And then if you want to get the other 20%, you have to talk to about another 92. So, but
Wow.
you know what? We need to, if we could hit 50% of the key issues that our patients have, we're going to exponentially improve the
For
experience and make huge
sure. For
improvements.
sure.
So that's what I always say is, like, yeah, just sit down, go to the waiting room, take 45 minutes or an hour for the next 8 afternoons, and go to the waiting room. People want to talk, they want to share their experiences, and I think you'll be surprised at what insights you can gather. And then once you start building on that, talk to people, listen for those struggle points, listen for those friction points, and look for those themes. And you'll probably find, 3 to 4 key areas that are opportunities to improve and opportunities to create a better experience for that digital journey.
Wow, I love that kind of flips the kind of perspective. I think that, digital marketers are often like, hammers looking for a nail, like, what's this next, feature thing that we can work on? But you're saying, hey, how can I improve the overall digital experience? How about you go into a waiting room and talk with the people? I think that's a perfect takeaway from our conversation. Steve, this was fantastic. I learned so much. If people want to find you online, like, what's the best way for them to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, often commenting on something insightful you said. So that's probably the easiest way to find me. But yeah, Steve Koch on LinkedIn, and then castingview.com is our website. So yeah, love to chat with people, love to talk about jobs to be done.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.